We've been told so many times that you can travel Australia for really cheap, especially if you buy your own camper van and sell it afterwards. However, that didn't really work out for us. The whole thing with the van was a nightmare, but more on this later. In this video, we want to share our full cost breakdown, including all the costs for buying and selling the car. And believe me, it is more than you would think. Just so you know, we traveled the southeast of Australia for a total of 129 days, about 4.5 months, as a couple, so all the costs are for 2 people. Let's get into it. I want to start with food because this was one thing that we were really shocked about. Prices for food are pretty high in Australia. However, it's also really good quality and the selection at supermarkets is huge. Your food budget depends greatly on 2 things. Number 1, how often are you going to eat out? Because eating out is even more expensive than going to the grocery store. Having lunch at a modest restaurant could easily cost you 30 to 40 euros. And number 2, how healthy do you want to eat? Sadly, as is the case in most countries, healthy stuff like veggies and fruits and nuts and whole grains are more expensive than cereal and junk food. With that being said, we do pay great attention to eating healthy, but almost never ate at a restaurant to save money, and we spend a total of 305,076 euros or 28 euros per day on food. This one is your biggest leverage when it comes to saving, and one of the things that we were told again and again before our trip: if you get the camper van, you will be able to sleep for free because you can just camp for free anywhere. Well, no. I mean, yes, there are places where you can camp for free, for sure. But at least on the East Coast and Southern Australia, we found it really hard to actually find spots. Either they were awful, next to the highway kind of places, or they were beautiful but super far away from anything you might be interested in seeing. So in total, we camped for free for 60 nights, about half of our time in Australia. 44 days were spent on paid campgrounds for a total of 987 euros or 22 euros on average. But this varies greatly. There is many campgrounds in national parks where you pay only a couple dollars, and others that are close to major cities where it's more like 50 Australian dollars per night. Sadly, we also had to spend a total of 25 days in hostels, as it took us almost 2 months to find our camper van, buy and prepare it, and then at the end of the trip sell it again. So during this time we needed a place to stay, and that was an additional 1,285 euros or 51 euros per night. So this comes to a total of 2,272 euros spent on accommodation, even if we slept for free a lot of the time. I would strongly recommend you budget for hotel and campground costs as well for your trip, because it's just not always possible to find free campgrounds. This is where Australia shines. So many activities are free. A lot of the national parks have a low or no entry cost, so hiking is generally very affordable, and all the beaches are free as well. It can get expensive if you book a lot of tours like whale watching or snorkeling trips, or if you want to take lessons, surfing for example, but we didn't do any of that, so we only paid around 409 euros for activities, which is a tiny 3 euros per day. There is a lot. We spent an insanely 1,491 euros or 12 euro per day on random things that I couldn't really categorize, but basically this is stuff like internet, laundry fees, guidebooks, pharmacy visits, a couple new hiking clothes that we got, or washing the car and buying stuff for the car like gas canisters and oil and stuff like that. This one I feel like is so easy to underestimate and kind of unavoidable at the same time, so I wanted to include it here as well. And lastly, the category that was most annoying to us, which is transportation. We thought it would be a good idea to buy a van because it is relatively easy to buy and sell cars in Australia, even as a foreigner, and then we would be able to sell it after our trip for the same or almost the same amount that we paid for it. Well, that didn't work out for us. But let me quickly share our normal transport costs. So that's for gas, parking fees, taking the subway in the bigger cities, and it comes to a total of 1,626 euros or 13 euros per day, which I personally think is completely fine. We also went to Tasmania and back by ferry during our time in Australia, which cost us 675 euros. By the way, costs for the flights to get to Australia are not included in this video. These are just so individual depending on where you arrive from, and it wouldn't make any sense to include them here. So, about the van. We searched for about 3 weeks and ended up buying a Toyota Hi-Ace, which is a very popular car in Australia, as it's still small enough to fit in any parking space and even in parking garages, but big enough to have a bed and cupboards and a pull-out kitchen, which was what we wanted. We have no idea about cars, so we had it inspected by a mechanic who told us about a couple things that needed replacing, but said it was basically fine to buy it, so we did, for around 16,000 euros. This was for the car, including a full build-out. During our time in the van, we had some of the mechanical stuff fixed, so the car got new tires, new driving belt, new brake discs, that kind of thing. We also repaired and improved things about the interior because, of course, it was far from perfect, so we made many trips to the hardware store. And then there were other costs like insurance and registering the car, the inspections before buying it, and stuff we needed to get for the kitchen, bed, and camping equipment like table, chairs, and so on. And then one of the biggest issue we had was that our van was sold to us with cockroaches, which of course we didn't realize until it was too late. Yes, you heard that right. We tried and tried to get rid of them until eventually we paid someone from pest control to do it professionally. Eventually we sold the car for about the same amount that we had bought it for, but with all of the costs that we had while we owned it, we lost around 4,090 euros on that van. And that is just sad to me, thinking about it now, especially as we ended up only staying for 4 months. I wish we would have rented a van and done maybe a shorter trip instead, which would have saved us so much trouble and time as well. So, how much did we spend overall 4.5 months in Australia? Obviously, your budget will depend highly on your style of travel and the level of comfort or discomfort you are okay with. But if you're similar to us in that regard, here's what to expect. For us, it was around 10,049 euros or 78 euros a day. But without the van. Sadly, if you take that into account, the total comes to 14,139 euros or 110 euros per day, which was a lot more than we had anticipated, to be honest. Our goal was 70 to 80 euros per day based on what other people had told us. So that trip was a lesson learned. Hopefully this video was helpful to you for planning and budgeting your trip to Australia. If so, feel free to hit the subscribe button and we'll see you in the next video.